He stepped off the private jet with the quiet grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime leading from the shadows. A crisp charcoal suit clung to his frame, polished shoes hitting the tarmac with silent confidence. But instead of a welcome, two uniformed officers moved in fast. "We've had reports of a suspicious individual coming off this aircraft," one officer barked, already reaching for his cuffs. The man didn't flinch, didn't speak. He simply held their gaze, then turned, his eyes forward as the cold steel clicked around his wrists. Passengers nearby pulled out their phones, filming in stunned silence. One bystander leaned toward another and whispered, "That's not just anyone." As the man was marched past the crowd, something slipped from his coat and hit the ground with a metallic clink. A gold FBI badge lay face up on the asphalt, unnoticed, by the men gripping his arms. Let us know where you're watching from, because what happens next humbles every man in uniform. Director Raymond Steele didn't need to raise his voice to command a room. In his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair, a steel-set jaw, and a gaze that could freeze a room without blinking, he carried the kind of presence that didn't ask for respect. It received it. For nearly 3 decades he had served his country in silence, rising through the ranks not by politics, but by purpose. From undercover operations in Eastern Europe to leading the FBI's counterterrorism task force, his legacy was etched not in headlines but in the lives he'd protected. The suit he wore today wasn't just tailored. It was armor. And the jet he had just stepped off was returning him from a global security summit, one where he had spoken, not just attended. He wasn't a man with power. He was power in its most disciplined form. The airport he arrived at was private, the VIP runway quiet, lined with tinted window sedans and discreet personnel. Everything had been arranged, but what hadn't been arranged was the involvement of local police, officers who hadn't received the brief and didn't care to ask questions. Officer D. Bailey was fresh out of tactical training, full of bravado, and scanning for suspicion where there was none. Officer R. Evans, his senior by a few years, wasn't much better. Quick to assume, slower to listen. They saw a black man step off a private jet alone, wearing confidence like it was dangerous. That was enough. They moved in with the certainty of men who believed their badges were shields against consequence. What they didn't know was that the very badge they ignored, the one tucked quietly into Raymond Steele's inner coat pocket, was heavier than their entire chain of command. Because real power doesn't have to announce itself. It just waits for the right moment to be seen. The call came in just before noon. A vague, anonymous tip about a suspicious black male in a dark suit deboarding a private jet. No threat reported, no weapon mentioned, just acting suspicious. That was enough for Officers Bailey and Evans. They were already parked near the tarmac, eager for action, itching for a moment to prove themselves. And when they saw Raymond Steele exit the jet alone, calm and poised, it confirmed the story they'd already written in their minds. They approached with authority that didn't ask, just assumed. "Excuse me, sir, we need to ask you a few questions," Bailey called, out, hand drifting to his belt. "Mind telling us what business you have stepping off that jet?" Raymond turned slowly, eyes calm beneath the sun, his hands resting at his sides. "I do mind," he said plainly, "but I suggest you verify who I am before you make this mistake." Evans stepped forward, voice sharper. "That won't be necessary. We've had a report." His hand reached for the cuffs. Please cooperate." Raymond took a breath. "Are you sure you want to do this?" They didn't answer. They just moved in. In seconds, the cuffs were on, cool metal clamping over seasoned wrists that had shaken, hands with presidents and signed off on national security operations. Raymond didn't flinch. He looked out over the tarmac, steady and silent. The pilot, still at the top of the stairs, rushed down in disbelief. "Officers, this man, he's not who you think he is." But his voice was swatted away with a dismissive gesture. "Step back, sir. This doesn't concern you." A few yards away, travelers began to notice. One woman pulled out her phone. Another whispered, "Is that?" Cameras started rolling. Whispers grew. Raymond didn't say a word. But inside, something churned. Not anger, just exhaustion. His mind drifted to other moments. When he'd been followed in a store at 17, pulled over for fitting a description at 25, mistaken for the help at a diplomatic dinner. He had always held his tongue, stayed calm, proved them wrong. But today they weren't just profiling a man. They were putting the entire system on trial, and they didn't even know it. Then the sound pierced the tension. A black SUV tore around the corner, tires screeching as it came to a halt just feet away. Doors flung open and 3 federal agents leapt out, bulletproof vests unfastened, earpieces in. The lead agent's eyes scanned the scene, his jaw dropping. "Director," he shouted, rushing forward. Bailey and Evans turned slowly, confusion breaking across their faces as the title hit their ears like thunder. Director. And suddenly, nothing made sense anymore. Federal agents swarmed the tarmac with precision, their movements sharp and unified. Within seconds, Raymond was surrounded, not by threats, but by those who knew exactly who he was. The lead agent, a tall woman with a no-nonsense stare and an FBI tactical badge on her chest, stepped directly in front of Officers Bailey and Evans. Her voice cracked like lightning. "Uncuff him. That's the director of the FBI." Bailey's face drained of color. Evans stood frozen, hand still twitching near his belt as if reality hadn't caught up yet. A collective gasp rippled through the bystanders. Phones, already filming, now surged forward. Dozens of lenses captured the disbelief, the shame, the unraveling of an assumption too bold and too common. The cuffs came off slowly, with awkward fingers and trembling regret. Bailey fumbled with the latch. Evans avoided eye contact entirely. "We didn't know," Bailey muttered, eyes flicking up in desperation. Raymond didn't move. He didn't nod. He simply rolled his wrists, stretching out the silence like a verdict. "You didn't ask," he said flatly. "You decided." His voice was quiet, controlled, and in that control lived something more devastating than outrage. Truth. The kind of truth that didn't shout because it didn't need to. The kind that walked with a badge heavier than their entire careers. Near his feet, the glint of something caught the sun. One of the federal agents stepped forward to retrieve it, but Raymond gently stopped him with a hand. His FBI badge, solid, gold, engraved with his name and position, lay face up on the tarmac, discarded like it had meant nothing. He bent down himself, picked it up, and dusted it off. There was no anger in the motion, just something colder, clearer, absolute. Raymond straightened his spine. He didn't speak again, didn't need to. He turned to walk away, flanked now by those who recognized him, protected him, not because he demanded it, but because he'd earned it, and the silence he left behind was deafening. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, the lead federal agent confirmed that Director Raymond Steele had been on official federal duty, returning from a classified counterterrorism summit. The arrest had not only violated protocol, it had been captured in Matirian City, full streamed live across multiple social media platforms and viewed by millions. The sight of one of the most powerful men in U.S. law enforcement being cuffed without question shook the nation to its core. Digging into the officer's records, journalists uncovered a pattern. Officer Bailey, the one who initiated the arrest, had already been flagged for 3 internal complaints involving racial profiling during traffic stops, none of which had led to disciplinary action. Now, under the weight of national attention, those records were back in the spotlight. This time, there would be no quiet dismissal. FBI Internal Affairs opened an immediate investigation into the local precinct's conduct. Media swarmed the department, demanding answers, but none came fast enough. Protesters gathered outside City Hall within 24 hours, holding signs that read, "If it can happen to him, it can happen to any of us." Raymond stayed silent at first, not out of hesitation, but strategy. And then, 3 days later, he stepped in front of a podium flanked by the Department of Justice seal and spoke, not as a man wronged, but as a man responsible. "This incident," he began, his voice steady, "was not about one mistake. It was about many. It was not about one moment. It was about a system. And it was not about me. It was about every name that wouldn't have made the news. Every person stopped, judged, and violated, without a camera, without backup, without a badge to fall from their coat pocket." The room was silent. Reporters lowered their cameras for a second, as if even the lens didn't want to blink. Raymond lifted his hand slightly and held up his badge, the same one that had hit the tarmac 3 days prior, but this time it was encased in glass, a small brass plaque affixed to the frame beneath it. It read, "They forgot who they were kneeling before." It wasn't vengeance, it was a mirror, and the nation was finally forced to look. Officer Bailey and Officer Evans were placed on immediate administrative leave, pending internal review. The official statement from the local precinct arrived late and was riddled with legal language, but the headline remained clear. "We apologize" for the wrongful detainment of FBI Director Raymond Steele. But the damage had already rooted itself deeper than a press release could erase. The image of 2 young officers handcuffing a man whose life had been spent defending the very freedoms they'd violated couldn't be scrubbed from the nation's conscience or its screens. Raymond was offered a private settlement, a personal reparation from the city. He declined. "I don't want a check," he said in a closed-door meeting with the mayor and city officials. "I want reform." Instead, he proposed a multi-tiered initiative, community engagement programs, early bias recognition training for officers, and mandatory federal standard de-escalation protocols across local departments. It wasn't symbolic. It was structural. Behind closed eyes, Raymond often revisited memories from decades earlier. His first patrol in a small southern town, his first partner whispering condescending instructions, the glances, the questions, the hesitations from civilians who couldn't believe he wore the badge. He had spent years building trust brick by brick while being questioned at every turn. What happened at the airport wasn't new to him. It was just televised this time. Then came a moment he never asked for. Congress introduced the Raymond Steele Accountability Act, a bipartisan bill requiring nationwide implicit bias training for all state and local officers receiving federal support. It passed with overwhelming support because this time the face behind the injustice wasn't invisible. At the same private airport where a man had once been handcuffed for not looking the part, workers quietly installed a small bronze plaque near Gate 4. It read, "Respect is not optional." Below it, a smaller line, "In honor of those who were judged before they could speak." Raymond stood beside it the day it was unveiled. No media, no cameras, just local students, junior officers, and teachers. He didn't arrive in a black SUV or flanked by agents. He came alone, holding a folder filled with scholarship forms and mentorship invitations. Now, he spends more time in classrooms than conference rooms, more time with sixth graders than senators. "I'm not here as your director," he tells them. "I'm here as proof that power means nothing if it doesn't serve." He doesn't carry the badge in his coat anymore. He keeps it in a frame, on his bookshelf, next to a photo of him in uniform from 1994. That photo reminds him of who he had to be. The badge reminds him of what he still needs to change. Because Raymond Steele's legacy won't be measured by titles earned, but by the generations he lifted simply by standing tall when others knelt too late. They cuffed the law, then knelt, before its quiet wrath. In a world where assumptions move faster than truth, Director Raymond Steele stood still, unwavering, and let the truth do what shouting never could. He didn't fight back with rage. He didn't raise his voice. He simply let the silence hold their shame until the world was forced to listen. Have you ever been judged before you could speak? Dismissed for how you looked rather than who you are? Raymond's story isn't rare. It's just rarely witnessed by the cameras. And that's why it matters. True power doesn't demand recognition. It reveals character. It doesn't posture. It doesn't perform. It stands. If Director Steele's story spoke to you, share it. Because some truths walk in silence, but leave. History shaken. We'll see you in the next story, where power doesn't scream. It stands.